When I was young, almost every night before bed, my dad would come and he would sit next to me, and he would either read or tell me a bedtime story. Usually, we'd make them up together, not one based on any book. We would completely invent it. There were no pictures, no pages to turn, just the quiet of my room, a soft lamp, and the two of us laughing together over some ridiculous story. Sometimes the prompts followed ants who stole food or spent a day at the beach. Other times, they followed a princess and her two squirrels trying to run a kingdom. The plots didn't always make complete sense, but it didn't matter because they were ours. Now, hands up to everyone in the audience, who's ever been told a bedtime story before? Well, it's my opinion that these stories, alongside many, many other types of stories, are arguably more important than people think, for kids, young and old, but also for the adults telling these stories. There are a myriad of lessons young kids can learn from storytelling. Logic and reasoning, for example, can be learned at a very early age, as well as as well as critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and debate, all things that I personally picked up at a very early age. For example, if we take a simple story about a dragon named Pete, let's say Pete lives in a magical teacup. If his teacup breaks, we have to decide what he does next. Maybe he goes to live in a safe to keep himself protected from the outside world. It's a silly example, I know, but a decision as simple as this can ultimately lead to the development of a child's brain. After all, lessons learned through storytelling are 22 times more memorable than those learned in facts and figures. And emotionally charged storytelling, so anything with a particularly emotional plot, actually increases the chance of behavioral change in kids by about 70%. Stories passed down through generations also have important lessons. Myths, fables, and family stories all contain powerful lessons, no matter how big or small. One that lies close to my heart, for example, was one told to me by my mom, passed down by my grandma, the story of the robin. It's a simple story about the origin of the bird, and it talks about how the robin, at once a plain bird, overlooked by all the others, was noticed by God, who pricked his finger and laid it to the bird's chest, leaving that iconic red spot. Yes, it's a small story told to me when I was very young, but robins were, and still are, my favorite bird. And every time I see it, I feel a connection to my family, a small spark of warmth as I remember that story. Connections are also something that can be formed through storytelling. We often find ourselves talking less and less nowadays. We're so busy trying to be busy that we forget to connect and talk about anything. Because we're finding more and more things that divide us, and so less things bring us together. Something as simple as telling a bedtime story or sharing an anecdote with a friend over a cup of tea can help strengthen that bond. Plus, it forms something else powerful: trust and a sense of being understood. That's what I remember most about telling stories as a kid, that feeling of being heard and of being a part of something when I told stories. For example, Finnish families actually have a quiet ritual before bed called the closing question. It's very simple. Every kid is asked the one question: what was the last good thing that happened to you today? There's no judgment, no criticism, no feedback, just the simple question said out loud. But psychologists studying these families for over a decade found something remarkable. The baseline anxiety in these kids were 60 to 80% lower than average. So what was the secret? Well, it wasn't optimism, it was closure. Naming that one last positive event before sleep ended the brain's stress loop. Cortisol levels dropped, the hippocampus encoded the memories safe, and the nervous system learned the world could end well. Without that final remark, thoughts continued to run, unfinished, unprocessed, unresolved. Traditions also carry stories. Any tradition you can think of, Christmas, Easter, Hanukkah, Day of the Dead, they all have a lesson and a message behind them. They help us learn about cultures, yes, but also cultural identity, an idea of who we are, what we believe in, or where we came from. They also sometimes help us cope with intense emotions like grief. But most importantly, they help families come together over food and celebrations and allow kids the space to wonder at the stories of the past. I'm sure those of you who celebrate Christmas can remember waking up to finding presents under the tree and wondering how Santa Claus managed such a silent breaking and entering. And yet it's that wonder that's dying out. We often find it easier nowadays to press play than say once upon a time. But when stories fade, something else fades too. Because it's arguably those 10 minutes at the end of the day that are the most important part of a child's life. Because they allow us to connect, to dream aloud, and to form a meaning together, as society, as family, and as friends. The world my generation is growing up in today needs people who can think outside the box, imagine possibilities, and so much more. All of these things can be learned, improved, and applied through storytelling. These skills aren't just learned through screens and textbooks alone, they start with something much simpler. A voice, a story, and someone willing to listen. So, to every parent, grandparent, caretaker, but also to children like me, running around at the end of the day trying to get work done, take a minute to stop and talk. Even if you're just sharing a story about your day before you turn off the light, it helps you slow down. Because these stories don't just help little kids fall asleep. They help people wake up to creativity, to imagination, and into the beauty of connection. Thank you.